Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart, Book 4, The Red Dragon 6. We went into York 3 days before the end of May. Ambrosius's scouts had confirmed his guess about York. There was a good road north from Caer Conan, and Octa had fled up this with Eosa, his kinsman, and had taken refuge in the fortified city which the Romans called Eboracum, and the Saxons Eoforwic or York. But the fortifications at York were in poor repair, and the inhabitants, when they heard of Ambrosius's resounding victory at Caer Conan, offered the fleeing Saxons cold comfort. For all Octa's speed, Ambrosius was barely 2 days behind him, and, at the sight of our vast army, rested and reinforced by fresh British allies, encouraged by the Red Dragon's victories, the Saxons, doubting whether they could hold the city against him, decided to beg for mercy. I saw it myself, being right up in the van with the siege engines under the walls. In its way, it was more unpleasant even than a battle. The Saxon leader was a big man, blond like his father and young. He appeared before Ambrosius, stripped to his trews, which were, of course, stuff bound with thongs. His wrists likewise were bound, this time with a chain, and his head and body were smeared with dust, a token of humiliation he hardly needed. His eyes were angry, and I could see that he had been forced into this by the cowardice, or wisdom, as you care to call it, of the group of Saxon and British notables who were crowded behind him out of the city gate, begging Ambrosius for mercy on themselves and their families. This time he gave it. He demanded only that the remnants of the Saxon army should withdraw to the north beyond the old wall of Hadrian, which, he said, would count as the barrier of his realm. The lands beyond this, so men say, are wild and sullen and scarcely habitable, but Octa took his liberty gladly enough, and after him, eager for the same mercy, came his cousin Eosa, throwing himself on Ambrosius's bounty. He received it, and the city of York opened its gates to its new king. Ambrosius's first occupation of a town was always to follow the same pattern. First of all, the establishment of order. He would never allow the British auxiliaries into the town. His own troops from less Britain, with no local loyalties, were the ones that established and held order. The streets were cleared, the fortifications temporarily repaired, and plans drawn up for the future work and put into the hands of a small group of skilled engineers who were to call on local labor. Then a meeting of the city's leaders, a discussion on future policy, an oath of loyalty to Ambrosius, and arrangements made for the garrisoning of the city when the army departed. Finally, a religious ceremony of thanksgiving, with a feast and a public holiday. In York, the first great city invested by Ambrosius, the ceremony was held in the church on a blazing day near the end of June, and in the presence of the whole army and a vast crowd of people. I had already attended a private ceremony elsewhere. It was not to be expected that there was still a temple of Mithras in York. The worship was forbidden, and in any case would have vanished when the last legion left the Saxon shore almost a century ago. But in the day of the legions, the temple at York had been one of the finest in the country. Since there was no natural cave nearby, it had originally been built below the house of the Roman commander, in a large cellar, and because of this the Christians had not been able to desecrate and destroy it, as was their wont with the sacred places of other men. But time and damp had done their work, and the sanctuary had crumbled into disrepair. Once, under a Christian governor, there had been an attempt to turn the place into a chapel crypt, but the next governor had been outspokenly, not to say violently, opposed to this. He was a Christian himself, but he saw no reason why the perfectly good cellar under his house should not be used for what, to him, was the real purpose of a cellar, namely to store wine, and a wine store it had remained, till the day Uther sent a working party down to clean and repair it for the meeting, which was to be held on the god's own feast day, the 16th of June. This time the meeting was secret, not from fear, but from policy, since the official thanksgiving would be Christian, and Ambrosius would be there to offer thanks in the presence of the bishops and all the people. I myself had not seen the sanctuary, having been employed during my first days in York on the restoring of the Christian church in time for the public ceremony. But on the feast of Mithras, I was to present myself at the underground temple with others of my own grade. Most of these were men I did not know or could not identify by the voice behind the mask, but Uther was always recognizable, and my father would of course be there, in his office as courier of the sun. The door of the temple was closed. We of the lowest grade waited our turn in the antechamber. This was a smallish square room, lit only by 2 torches held in the hands of the statues, one on either side of the temple door. Above the doorway was the old stone mask of a lion, worn and fretted part of the wall. To either side, as worn and chipped, and with noses and members broken and hacked away, the 2 stone torchbearers looked ancient and dignified. The anteroom was chill in spite of the torches and smelled of smoke. I was cold at work on my body. I felt the cold at work on my body. It struck up from the stone floor into my bare feet, and under the long robe of white wool I was naked. But just after the first shiver ran up my skin, the temple door opened, and in an instant all was light and colour and fire. Even now, after all these years and knowing all that I have learned in a lifetime, I cannot find it in me to break the vow I made of silence and secrecy. Not so far as I know has any man done so. Men say that what you are taught when young can never be fully expunged from your mind. And I know that I, myself, have never escaped the spell of the secret god who led me to Brittany and threw me at my father's feet. Indeed, whether because of the curb of the spirit, of which I have already written, or whether by intervention of the god himself, I find that my memory of his worship has gone into a blur, as if it was a dream, and a dream it may be, not of this time alone, but made up of all the other things, of all the other times. From the first vision of the midnight field to this night's ceremony, which was the last. A few things I remember: more torchbearers of stone, the long benches on either side of the centre aisle, where men reclined in their bright robes, the masks turned to us, eyes watchful, the steps at the far end, and the great apse with the arch like a cave mouth opening on the cave within, where under the star-studded roof was the old relief in stone of Mithras at the bull-slaying. It must have been somehow protected from the hammers of the god-breakers, for it was still strongly carved and dramatic. There he was, in the light of the torches, the young man of the standing stone, the fellow in the cap, kneeling on the fallen bull, and with his head turned away in sorrow striking the sword into its throat. At the foot of the steps stood the fire altars, one on each side. Beside one of them, a man robed and masked as a lion, with a rod in his hand. Beside the other, the Heliodromos, the courier of the sun. And, at the head of the steps, in the centre of the apse, the Father waiting to receive us. My raven mask had poor eye-holes, and I could see only straight forward. It would not have been seemly to look from side to side with that pointed bird mask. So I stood listening to the voices and wondering how many friends were here, how many men I knew. The only one I could be sure of was the courier, tall and quiet there by the altar fire, and one of the lions, either him by the archway, or one of the grade who watched from somewhere along the makeshift benches. This was the frame of the ceremony. and all that I can remember, except the end. The officiating lion was not Uther after all. He was a shorter man, of thick build, and seemingly older than Uther. And the blow he struck me was no more than a ritual tap, without the sting that Uther usually managed to put into it. Nor was Ambrosius the courier. As the latter handed me the token metal bead, the token meal of bread and wine, I saw the ring on the little finger of his left hand, made of gold, enclosing a stone of red jasper, with a dragon crest carved small. But when he lifted the cup to my mouth, and the scarlet robe slipped back from his arm, I saw a familiar scar, white on the brown flesh, and looked up to meet the blue eyes behind the mask, a light with a spark of amusement that quickened to laughter as I stared and spilled the wine. Uther had stepped up 2 grades, it seemed, in the time since I had last attended the mysteries, and since there was no other courier present, there was only one place for Ambrosius. I turned from the courier to kneel at my father's feet, but the hands which took my own between them for the vow were the hands of an old man, and when I looked up, the eyes behind the mask were the eyes of a stranger. 8 days later was the official ceremony of Thanksgiving. Ambrosius was there, with all his officers, even Uther, for, said my father to me afterwards when we were alone, as you will find, all gods who are born of the light are brothers. And in this land, if Mithras, who gives us victory, is to bear the face of Christ, why then we worship Christ. We never spoke of it again. The capitulation of York marked the end of the first stage of Ambrosius's campaign. After York, we went to London in easy stages, with no more fighting, unless you count a few skirmishes by the way. What the king had to undertake now was the enormous work of reconstruction and the consolidation of his kingdom. In every town and strong point he left garrisons of tried men, under trusted officers, and appointed his own engineers to help organize the work of rebuilding and repairing towns, roads, and fortresses. Everywhere the picture was the same. Once fine buildings ruined or damaged almost beyond repair, roads half obliterated through neglect, villages destroyed, and people hiding fearfully in caves and forests, places of worship pulled down or polluted. It was as if the stupidity and lawless greed of the Saxon hordes had cast a blight over the whole land. Everything that had given light, art, song, learning, worship, the ceremonial meanings of the people, the feasts at Easter or Hallowmass, or midwinter, even the arts of husbandry, all these had vanished under the dark clouds on which rode the northern gods of war and thunder. And they had been invited here by Vortigern, a British king. This now was all that people remembered. They forgot that Vortigern had reigned well enough for 10 years, and adequately for a few more, before he found that the war spirit he had unleashed on his country had outgrown his control. They remembered only that he had gained his throne by bloodshed and treachery and the murder of a kinsman, and that the kinsman had been the true king. So they came flocking now to Ambrosius, calling on him the blessings of their different gods, hailing him with joy as king, the first king of all Britain, the first shining chance for the victory to be won, the first shining chance for the country to be won. Other men have told the story of Ambrosius's crowning and his first work as King of Britain. It has even been written down, so here I will only say that I was with him for the first 2 years, as I have told. But then, in the spring of my 20th year, I left him. I had had enough of councils and marching and long legal discussions where Ambrosius tried to reimpose the laws that had fallen into disuse, and the everlasting meetings with elders and bishops, droning like bees, days and weeks for every drop of honey. I was even tired of building and designing. This was the only work I had done for him in all the long months I served with the army. I knew at last that I must leave him, get out of the press of affairs that surrounded him, The God does not speak to those who have no time to listen. The mind must seek out what it needs to feed on, and it came to me at last that what work I had to do, I must do among the quiet of my own hills. So in spring, when we came to Winchester, I sent a message to Cadle, then sought Ambrosius out to tell him I must go. He listened, half absently. Cares pressed heavily on him these days, and the years, which had sat lightly on him before, now seemed to weigh him down. I have noticed that this is often the way with men who set their lives toward the distant glow of one high beacon, when the hilltop is reached and there is nowhere further to climb, and all that is left is to pile more on the flame and keep the beacon burning. Why, then, they sit down beside it and grow old? Where their leaping blood warmed them before, now the beacon fire must do it from without. So it was with Ambrosius. The king who sat in his great chair at Winchester and listened to me was not the young commander whom I had faced across the map-strewn table in Les Britain, or even the courier of Mithras who had ridden to me across the frost-bound field. "I cannot hold you," he said. "You are not an officer of mine. You are only my son. You will go where you wish. I serve you, you know that. But I know now how best I can serve you. You spoke the other day of sending a troop toward Caerleon. Who's going?" He looked down at a paper. A year ago he would have known without looking. "Priscus, Valens, probably Sidonius. They go in 2 days' time. Then I'll go with them." He looked at me. Suddenly it was the old Ambrosius, back again. "An arrow out of the dark? You might say so. I know I must go." "Then go safely, and someday come back to me." Someone interrupted us then. When I left him, he was already going word by word through some laborious draft of the new statutes for the city. And that is the end of chapter 6.